Welcome to the lecture on dairy cow feeding, right? So by no means is this an advanced course in dairy cow nutrition. So I'm not calling it dairy cow nutrition. I'm instead calling it dairy cow feeding. Right? So I'm going through the basics, right? So you definitely need to upgrade your knowledge if you want to become an advanced nutritionist of any kind. Right. So you see, for dairy to be successful, you can't have just high genetics or uh, high fertility, or the government policy alone, right? So these won't make success unless they are working together, right? So that is really important. Genetics alone, fertility alone, you know, however much money you have to set up the best dairy infrastructure or milking parlor is not going to make it successful unless there is a good coordination and all of these click together, right? So that is when you will have success. But however, even if one of these stops, right, then dairy basically cannot be made successful. And currently, it is the feeding sector in Sri Lanka that I think is, rate limiting step. Mm, I mean, it's not like not turning at all, but it's very limited from in both in quantity and quality, unfortunately. So far we have talked about feeding at the level of pre-weaner calves, weaner calves, or heifers, pregnant heifers, fresh cows, um, right? So, and like up to this level, I suppose we have talked about, right? So today we will talk about adult animals also, um, including pregnancy. We did talk about pregnancy nutrition requirements a little bit for heifers, but for cows and then the lactation is the main difference here, um, and so on. We will go into a little bit more detail, right? So, like I said earlier, nutrition really is very advanced, right? Um, Almost like this, right? But for the purpose of this lecture, we are going to keep it really simple, and we are going to mainly, start off with some very basic principles, right? The first of which I'm going to call the GIGO principle. I don't know if you've heard of this, whether it's feeding or anything else, right? There is, if you put garbage in, you get garbage out. So, in the sense of nutrition or feeding, if you eat garbage food, so the example shown here is all high carbohydrate based diet, right? Without any exercise, you know, garbage in, garbage out is what you get, right? So whether it's humans or dairy animals, it's not different. If you give a low quality feed, you're going to get a low quality output in the form of milk, both quantity and quality, right? So on the other hand, the second principle, if you, as a human being, if you eat a healthy diet, a value diet, value in, value out, right? And you put in a lot of exercise, you get, you put in value and you get value out, right? So same with dairy animals, you give a high quality feed, you get a high quality output of milk in terms of um, quality and quantity, right? So like I said, a real value feed should have all of these components properly balanced, right? Energy, protein, fat, vitamins, minerals, fiber, etc., etc. But in the Sri Lankan scenario, um, because the majority of animals are, we are dealing with less than 20 liters or whatever daily milk production, right? Not in the 40-50 liter per day range. The major deficiency that we have observed is in energy, right? It's not the fats or the vitamins or the minerals, right? So a lot of people talk about bypass fats and so on, right? But bypass fats become a necessity only when animals are high producers, right? For the regular animals that we encounter on a day-to-day basis, 15 to 20 liter animal, 10 to 15 20 liter animals, you really don't have to worry about these a lot, right? Any diet is going to have vitamins, minerals, proteins, and you will see during the lectures notes that protein requirement, etc., go up when the daily milk production goes up, right? So we are going to focus on energy only. However, I don't advise you to focus on energy only when you're really doing it in the field situation. You have to look at the other components, other ingredients as well, right? But for the purpose of this lecture, we are going to focus on energy only because that is the major deficiency in the Sri Lankan scenario, right? So before we talk about cattle energy requirements, do we know what our energy requirements are? So how many of you know what your daily caloric or energy requirement is? Right? So take a pause and think about that, right? Um, okay, so I couldn't find a Sri Lankan example. So what I'm going to present here is a European diet, right? So here's a high calorie, unhealthy diet, right? Sounds delicious, right? Egg and bacon muffin, iced coffee, low fat iced coffee, in fact, right? Large latte, burger, fries, chocolate bar. See how much chocolate bar has, right? So sounds delicious, but it's got 16,300 kilojoules, right? Which is twice as much as we need. And then here's a low calorie, healthy diet, high fiber breakfast cereal, right? Fruit, toast, coffee with low fat milk, whole meal sandwich with lean meat, and so on, right? So that is a low calorie healthy diet. See, that comes to 8,700 kilojoules, which is, in megajoules, 8.7 megajoules, right? And so we usually talk about in calories, right? So different countries talk about different um, units, as you know, right? But when it comes to humans, we usually talk about in calories, right? So do your tech homework, right? Find out how many calories or kilocalories this is, and that is our general um, caloric daily caloric requirement. You need to know, right? So you need to know what because from a public health angle, right? So one of the jobs of the veterinarian is food supply, milk, eggs, right? Milk products, meat products. So one of the duties of a veterinarian, the roles of a veterinarian, is that therefore the veterinarian needs to know uh, human beings daily caloric requirements, right? Not for your own self, but for the purpose of veterinary public health, right? So this is important in another sense. That is why I converted it into megajoules, right? So remember this number, huh? So remember this number. Let's say something like 8 megajoules, 9 megajoules for a 70 uh, kilogram human being, right? Or 60 to 70 kilogram human being. Just remember this, huh? And we'll see why that is important from a dairy point of view. Right. So like I said, we have talked about these different ones, and we will be starting with the lactating cow today, right, which is, essentially here after calving. Right. So calf energy requirements, remember, it was dependent on the body weight, obviously. Average daily gain, because animals growing at a slower growth rate will have a different energy requirement than animals growing at a higher growth rate, right? So there was a maintenance energy, MEM, metabolizable energy of maintenance, and then there was metabolizable energy of growth, right? So depending on the growth rate, see, faster growing animal, double the speed, 400 grams, double the requirement, right? Same here, 200 grams, 1.8, 400 grams, 4.1, and so on, right? So the total energy requirement is the uh, addition of maintenance energy and metabolizable energy for growth, right? So that was for calves, right? So that's all they do: maintenance, regular maintenance functions, and growth functions, right? So note the ratios here initially. Maintenance is, three times as much as growth, right? But eventually they catch up, right? Almost the same. Maintenance is the same as growth energy, and there were all these complex formulas that we talked about, right? So you should, if you are given these figures, right, you should be able to work out um, these formulas. You can get them at an exam, right? So don't forget that, don't ignore them. So this was for slightly larger calves. So here up to 45 kilograms, 80 kilograms, right? So those things again depends on the growth rate. 250 grams per day growth, up to 1 kilo per gram kilogram growth per day, and so on, right? I'm just giving these to refresh your memories. We've already done this, right? And then we talked about heifer feed requirements, right? Again, heifers are also growing and maintenance. So maintenance energy, growth energy, right? Um, right. So maintenance, growth, and again different protein requirements. Note that the protein requirement gradually goes down, right? See, their growth also goes down gradually, and see, energy requirement also goes down, right? As the system becomes more efficient, right? And then we talked about energy requirements for pregnancy for heifers, because they will eventually get pregnant, and that's the whole idea. So initially, energy requirements for pregnancy are minimal, because embryo fetus is small. Later on, these due date, and these are weeks before calving. So this is about 3 months before calving, 2 months before calving, right? So this is not in calorie. This chart shows in kilograms dry matter, extra kilograms dry matter the heifers need for pregnancy, right? So assuming it's 11 megajoules per ME diet, right? So 2 months before calving, the animal needs about 20 extra megajoules for pregnancy. I'm sorry, about 11 extra megajoules, and like 2 weeks before calving, it goes up to 20 megajoules, maybe here something like 25 megajoules a day, right? Extra in addition to this maintenance and growth, right? So if this animal was pregnant, non-pregnant, right, the total energy requirement for this animal is 102. But if the animal was pregnant and ready to calve uh, tomorrow, right? So the animal's energy requirement is that 102 plus 11 times 3, 33, 135, something along those lines, right? So that you need to understand. This is also a very important number to remember, right? Right. Okay. So for calves, we said it was growth and maintenance. For pregnant heifer calves, you add pregnancy onto that, right? So on top of that, do cows meaning they have already calved and they're lactating. What other energy requirements do they have, right? First of all, maintenance, obviously, right? So I mean, you don't have to know these figures by memory, right? Because you can always, if you have to do this calculation at the farm level, you can do a brief calculation. You can just refer to your know, dairy Bible or whatever, and you can get the exact value, right? But for the purpose of, you know, examinations and your knowledge, you just need to know they are approximately, the maintenance energy is approximately 11% of the body weight. Maintenance energy in megajoules, right, per day is approximately 11% of the body weight. See, 11% of 400 would be 44. 11% of 500 would be 55, right? So 11% of 600 would be 66. So as the animal becomes larger, it shifts from 11% to 10%, right? But when they are smaller, see, 300, 12% is 36. 200, 13% is 26, right? 100, 17%, right? But for the animals that we deal with, in the Sri Lankan situation, maybe you will have a 350 kilogram or 400 kilogram jersey, smallest size. Largest size would be Beverly New Zealand farm. You will have this 600 plus, right? But generally 550 or less, right? So from 350 to 550, approximately 11%. If you remember that, in the field level, at the field level, you can do a quick calculation and, in your head and calculate the energy requirement of a cow, right? So that is the idea here. So please disregard this column, right? We are going to focus on this column, ME requirements, right? But be aware that there is such a system as well where you can calculate the total digestible nutrients as well, right? Right. So for heifers, remember we said so last month, right? Energy requirement was something like so last month, right? Energy requirement was something like along the lines of 20 megajoules. So 1.7 kg is like 20 at the rate of 11 per kilogram, right? 20 to 35 as of the due date, right? But for um, cows, we say during the last month, it's 20, throughout, but of course it will increase towards parturition because the fetus obviously gets larger, right? So before the 6th month, again, this will slightly change depending on the textbook you refer to and depending on the region the data comes from. depending on the breed, right? So there won't be a universal standard for breed and climate and management system and all. Remember, all these animals, although they are Frisians, these Frisians have been, different lines, right? Family lines. The ones that are bred in Australia, the ones from the US, the European ones, right? They may not necessarily have immediate genetic relationships, right? They've been selected and bred for different purposes, and they will have different requirements also based on how they have been selectively bred, right? So another book you read may say for fifth month you need 6 megajoules per day, right? Right. So basically, if it's a if it's in the seventh month of gestation, in addition to this growth and milk and all that, you have to add 10 megajoules per day for its pregnancy, right? If it's on the ninth month, you have to add 20 megajoules per day, basically, right? Right. And obviously, the major difference between the heifer and the cow is that the cow is lactating, right? So therefore, you have to add the energy requirement for milk. So something to note here is, again, there is no universal figure, right? This depends on the composition of milk, protein percentage and fat percentage, right? So the lower the fat and protein, the lower the energy requirement. The higher the protein and fat, the higher the energy requirement, right? So therefore, for milk production per liter, right, megajoules per metabolizable energy, megajoules of metabolizable energy per liter of milk, right, can range from 4.5 all the way to 7, right? But the general milk that we encounter, you already know the protein percentage. Remember, we said 3.27, 3.33, 3.4 protein, right? Holstein Friesian milk, and then some around this for fat, right? So this is the kind of energy required for per liter of milk in the Sri Lankan situation. But if they are jerseys with higher protein and fat, right, you might be dealing with about 6, right? So really high quality jerseys or certain other breeds with high fat and protein, the energy requirement might be as high as 7, right? So if you so far, right, if you can remember 11% for metabolizable energy, maintenance energy, and these numbers for pregnancy, and forget 5.2, just remember 5 for Frisian and 6 for Jersey. In the field situation, you should be able to do a fairly accurate energy calculation. Right. And of course, we've talked about the body condition score, the loss and the gains during the late lactation. So you have to factor that in as well, right? So we said ideally a cow should not lose more than zero point 0.5, right, of body condition. And we also talked about how much of a back fat thickness and of what percentage of the body weight is equal to one condition score, right, which was 8%. Right? So if an animal loses one body condition score, right, that is about 8% of its weight. Animal loses only 0.5 under the ideal situation, then that is 4% of the body weight, right? So again, for that group of animals that we are concerned, 400 to 550 kilos, the animals that we deal with usually, uh, one body condition score comes to exactly about 8% of the body weight, right? But then you have to calculate further, right? So that 44 kilograms of fat, how much energy was that actually, right? So this is the energy available from 1 kilogram of weight loss, right? So basically, if the cow mobilizes 1 kilogram of body fat, that body fat gives the animal 28 megajoules of metabolizable energy. So if if a 550 kilogram animal loses zero point 0.5 condition score, that means that is 22 kilos, right? So the total energy the animal got from losing that 22 kilos is 22 times 28 megajoules. I don't know what that is, something like 600 megajoules of energy, right? So that is what the animal loses, right, in terms of kilos, and mobilizes for its use in terms of megajoules, right? 600 megajoules, let's say, during early lactation. But then during late lactation or dry period, the animal uh, will be able to will be will gain that body condition back, as we discussed earlier, right? But note here, to gain 1 kilogram of that lost body weight or fat, here now the animal has to spend 44 megajoules of metabolizable energy. So here animal during early lactation only got 28 from each kilo, but now animal has to spend 44 to get that 1 kilo, right? So for each kilogram the animal loses of body fat, animal loses 16 megajoules of energy, right? Because this is the basic fundamental law in the world. So this is the input, this is the output. However efficient a machine is, it can never reach 100% efficiency. That is what is shown here, right? So for this machine, if you give 44, you only get out 28, right? So the more body condition score you lose, the more body weight the animal loses, the more body condition the animal loses, the more energy, 16 times per each kilo, the animal loses and the farmer loses in profitability, right? So let's say animal loses 40 kilograms, right? So 40 kilograms times 16, that's 40 times 16, 600 megajoules lost in the equation to thin air, right? So basically farmer has lost that body energy because of the loss of body conditions. So that is why we say you should keep it minimal, right? So if the condition loss is minimal, this loss 16 times number of kilos is lower, right? Therefore the loss to the farmer in terms of economics is lower, right? So here's another place where you can uh, tap that, right? So it has been shown that to gain body weight during dry period, right, the animal has to spend more energy, even more than late lactation, right? So if, of course, from a management point of view, it's a lot easier to gain body condition score during the dry period because animal is not lactating. So whatever extra feed you give will go towards replenishing that lost body weight, right? But however, look at the difference here. Now you're losing 27 megajoules per each kilo, right? So that is why we say by the time of drying off, you have to gain that body condition score of 3.25 or 3.5. So that way you save another 11 megajoules of metabolizable energy per kilo of body weight loss, right? So I hope this is clear. So do spend some more time to understand this, right? So really outlines why we should minimize loss of body condition score, and then why we should try our best to gain it during the late lactation period, right? So like I said earlier, right? So different books give slightly different numbers, right? And different perspectives on this, right? So these previous one was also from Australia. These also from Australia, but two different authors. They are all both Johns, right? First one was John Moran. This one is John House, right? I have personally worked with both of them. So according to John House's book, Professor John House of the University of Sydney, so he has simplified this a lot more. So he says 60 megajoules for a 500 kilogram body weight animal, and then plus or minus 5 megajoules for every 50 kilogram change. So he simplifies this for horse infusions 5 megajoules, for Jersey cows 6 megajoules. So there's a slight difference here, big difference in fact. The previous guide said yes, you get 20 megajoules from each loss of each kilo, but that said 44 to regain it during late lactation and 55 during the dry period, but this says 34, right? So pregnancy, the previous guide also had similar numbers from 6 months onwards, but John House's book uh, refers to extra energy from the fifth month onwards. So this is important. How much energy is required for exercise? So obviously, animal that is not walking versus animal walking on flat, sloping down, or hilly land, you have to allocate energy for that, right? So it's not going to be the same energy for the stationary animal versus animals walking significant distances, right? So you have to factor that in, right? So you have to have maintenance, milk production, pregnancy, body condition, loss organ, and exercise, right? So these are the five aspects you have to consider. And in addition to this, right, so we said uh, dairy animals reach mature body weight during the third parity, right? So if this is a first parity animal or a second parity animal, right? Animal in first lactation. In addition to this, you need to add one extra thing. What is that? Growth. Animal is still growing, right? So you need to add that also, right? So this is what I mentioned about proteins earlier, right? So the protein composition, right, percentage has to increase when the daily lactation increases, right? That's why I said the animals that we deal with 10 to 20 liters or even less than 10 liters per day production, their protein requirement is relatively low, and therefore it will get automatically balanced by the diet you give, because any diet has protein, right? So unless you give very poor quality straw based diet only, which is poor in protein, then of course the animal will be protein deficient. But if you give a fairly high quality diet including concentrate feed, the animal will get some proteins from that, right? So but if it goes towards this level, then obviously you have to think of supplementing in different ways, right? And so like I said, these values will depend on the breed, the body weight, the climate, the family line, purposes of selective breeding, and so on and so forth. Right. So, so this is a typical um, cow ear, right? Let's assume this is the calving point and the maximum milk yield is 15, right? So it's dried off in 305 days, 60-day dry period. So typical milk curve, starting at 5, finishing at around 3 when it's dried off, maximum 15 liters, you know, during the second month, right? So remember, so this is important to remember, the maintenance energy, regardless of milk production, is the same, right? So, so if I ask you what is the approximate weight of this animal, what is your answer? The maintenance energy requirement is 50. What is the body weight of this animal? Should be around 450, right? 450 times 11% will come to about 50, right? So it's a 450 kilogram animal. right? So what is the milk energy requirement for milk, metabolizable energy requirement for milk? If you assume they are going to average these amounts, right? So averaging 10 liters this month, right? 50 megajoules per day at the point of 15-liter production. 15 times 5, 75. 14 liters, 13 liters, 11 liters, 10 liters, 8 liters, 6 liters, 5, 4, and finally drying off, right? So I'm assuming 5 megajoules of metabolizable energy per liter of milk. And then for pregnancy, so we are adding energy from the 5th month onwards, but remember this is just not gestation, and this is lactation. Typically, animal becomes pregnant after the 2nd month. This will actually be the uh, 1st month of lactation, right? So in around 3 months, let's assume animal becomes pregnant in 3 months. So 1st month of pregnancy, 2nd month, 3rd month, 4th month, 5th month, right? That's when we start adding 6, 7, 8, 9, right? So that's when animal requires as much as 20 megajoules per day for the pregnancy, right? And if you add those up, right, so that's a fetus getting larger and larger, requiring more and more energy. So you add them up. These are the kind of numbers you are going to get, right? So that's about the highest for a 15-liter animal. Right? But of course, if it produces 10 extra liters, 10 liters would be around 50 megajoules. So this becomes 175, right? If it's a 30-liter animal, that's another extra 75 megajoules. This becomes 200, right? Okay, right. Um, so right now, sorry about this animation mishap. Right. So now let's say you're feeding this animal in 3rd month of lactation, 120 megajoules, right? That is its requirement. 50 goes for maintenance, 70 goes for milk, right? So although in theory animal consumed 5 megajoules per liter of milk, right? That's how you get 70. 14 times 5, right? If you consider all the energy that the animal consumed, right? So 120 is what the animal consumed. You divide 120 by 14, this is what you get, right? So although in reality it it consumed only 5 megajoules per liter, um, you know, this 50 also goes into milk. What else does it go, right? Um, right. So that if you from an economic point of view, the farmer has fed 120 megajoules and he gets out 14 liters. So he is essentially spending 8.5 megajoules per liter of milk. Right. Now assume you only fed 80 megajoules. Right? So if you fed only 80 megajoules, do you think animal will consume less for maintenance? No, right? So that is a fundamental requirement of the animal for its regular functions, right? So whether you lie down in bed all day, you watch TV all day on your couch, or you exercise, or you go to work, or you do whatever, right? Your maintenance is always there. All these metabolic functions inside, oxidative phosphorylation, digestion, right? All those are maintenance functions, right? So they need this 50 megajoules, whether you feed them 50, 60, 80, 100, 200, this is what they will use for maintenance. So this leaves out only 30 for milk production, right? So this is a non-pregnant animal. And can the animal produce 14 liters of milk from 30 megajoules? No, it can't. It will only produce 6 megajoules. So what happens? Now the farmer has fed 80 megajoules. Animal has given 6 liters of milk. and suddenly milk becomes expensive, right? So divide 80 divided by 6, this is what you get. So the high producing animal, farmer only had to spend 8.5 megajoules per liter, right? But the low producing animal, farmer had to spend 13.5 megajoules of feed per liter of milk. So this is why uh, cost of production is lower with high producing animals. Okay, right, so this you really need to understand. If the animal has potential to give more milk, the more milk you get, the more profitable it will be for the farm. Right, so we see typical example of a garbage diet giving a garbage result, right? Expensive milk, right? So now you know what is a value feed in terms of energy, you know what is a garbage feed. How do you know if you're actually feeding 120 or 80 megajoules? Okay, that is the big question, right? Okay, in order to understand that, let's do some calculations and see. Okay, so assume a 550 kilogram cow, no activity, which means no exercise, right? Remember we talked about energy requirements for exercise: flat, sloping, or hilly land, 1, 3, or 5 megajoules per kilometer, right? So you don't have to worry about that because it's a animal that doesn't exercise. 6 month of pregnancy, which means it consumes about um, 8 megajoules per day, producing 13 liters of milk, right? Containing this much. Okay, so calculate how much energy the animal needs. Refer to the tables from John Moran. Hmm? Right, so you should get, I hope you've done the calculation. You should get 59 here for maintenance, no exercise, 1 month after calving, non-pregnant, producing 20 liters. This is something like 5.1 megajoules per liter. So 5.1 times 20 is 102, right? For milk, 102 plus 59, 161, right? And then it is losing 500 grams of live weight per day, right? So we know from 1 kilogram the animal gets 28 megajoules of energy, and now from 500 grams it gets 14. So the question here is, what do you do to the 14, right? Do you add it to this 161, or do you subtract it from the 161? What do you think? I'm going to let you think about that, right? Actually, the answer is there somewhere. Um, right. So you can figure it out. Okay. So now that was an example of an animal in early lactation, right? Non-pregnant, losing weight. Here is an example of an animal in late lactation, 7th month of pregnancy, relatively low milk production, and now the animal is gaining body weight, right? Okay, so go ahead and do your calculation and see what you get, and pause the video please. Okay, so you should get this answer if you did it right. So the textbook, for some reason they didn't have 10 here for pregnancy, so I added that, right? So you should get this answer, right? Now you know you need 142, and then your question is, how do you feed this 142? So to do that, you need to know the what we call feed values, right? Feed values for different types of ingredients, right? So here, yeah, so I've taken it from, Victoria Australia website, right? So feed values. Remember, you can refer to this site or any other reliable site you find on the web, right? So some different energy values here. See, ryegrass, we find this in Beverly, New Zealand farms. 12%, I'm sorry, 12 megajoules per kilogram of metabolizable energy and 11% crude protein. That's quite a good diet. That one also, right? Uh, these are some figures the VRI has obtained um, from their studies, right? I find this number a little difficult to believe. Guinea grass has that much. I doubt it, but they have, this is what they have found experimentally, so we have to believe that, right? So generally we say Guinea grass is a low quality uh, type of forage, right? We always thought it had less than this, maybe 5 or 6 megajoules per kilogram, dry matter kilogram, but this is what they have found experimentally, right? So you don't need to memorize all these, right? But you have to have a rough idea, especially if you're a field veterinarian. I mean, they are not going to, in your area, they will give a limited number of ingredients, right? So if your area uses ryegrass, you have to know by heart what these numbers are. If they feed CO3 or CO4, these are the numbers, right? If they feed maize, these are the numbers. I mean, even if you have to memorize all of these, can't be too difficult. 15 ingredients, right? If you can't memorize these 15 ingredients, what's the point of being a veterinarian, being a dairy veterinarian, right? So, I mean, the main things you need to remember, understand is that, something like paddy straw is poor in both energy and crude protein, right? So some of these numbers, are not what we see in international books. For example, maize or corn, you know, we see up to 13 or 15 megajoules in international publications, right? But unfortunately, in Sri Lanka, these are the numbers the VRI has obtained, right? 10 to 11. So dal dust, see, poor in energy, high in protein, we say paripu, high protein diet anyway, right? So some of these numbers don't match with what we see internationally, right? So here's an example here, maize, 15 versus 10 that we got, 10 and 7, 15 and 9. See, high quality maize versus low quality maize, right? So this could be a laboratory error, or this could be really poor quality maize because the soil wasn't fertile, weather wasn't good, there was no water, maturity is too much, etc., etc., right? But high quality maize is supposed to have these kinds of numbers, right? So you see, these are some cereal grains, right? So we have in Sri Lanka sorghum, rice, right? So oil cakes, right? So we don't have these, but we have punak, coconut punak is belongs to this group of oil cakes, right? So coconut punak you can expect to be something like this. Is punak here? I don't remember seeing punak here. That is punak, right? So 10 and 19, see, high protein. So similar numbers here, but higher energy here, right? But a lot more proteins here. That's the idea, right? So now look at fish meal. Obviously, we don't use fish meal in dairy feed formulation, but it's used in poultry feed formulation, very source of high protein, right? So just have an idea, right? So byproducts, here's one that we use. The rice polishings here has 14 and 11, but rice polishing here 6 and 12, right? So these were, maybe you have heard on the TV news that we export the high quality product, and what we keep in the local market is the low quality product. Maybe that is the reason for these uh, you know poor numbers, right? So this is right. So if you were to get all these figures, these conventionally, right, it was a huge process, right? All these bomb calorimeter, Kjeldahl method for protein, etc., etc., that you may have heard of, right? But in the modern day, there's this equipment called near infrared spectrophotometer, right? So you would have heard of spectrophotometry in biochemistry and virology, etc., etc., right? That we use for diagnostic purposes and quantitative diagnosis, quantitative quantifying various things, right? So it's the same technology that is used here. So spectrophotometry meaning spectrum, wavelength. That's what it's using. So please do read about this and have an idea, basic idea on what they do and how they give these values. So basically, with the really modern, advanced NIRSS, you can just push them against a pile of feed, and it's going to give you a printout of the ingredients composition the feed has. That really is amazing. However, it is not as a rosy bed as it sounds. There are some challenges to this. You need to calibrate it to the type of feed you're testing and so on and so forth. Nevertheless, the simple fact that such a thing exists is amazing, and you need to know as a dairy veterinarian, even if you haven't seen one or used one. Right. Now, very theoretical calculations. Remember, going back to that 142 megajoules per day. See how you can feed this 142 using different combinations of foragers and concentrate, right? So, for example, think I just put Prima. It doesn't have to be Prima. It can be CIC. It can be super feeds. There are various brands of concentrate pellet feed. See how you can balance this out, right? So do remember, this just getting this 100, balancing out the energy like this is not sufficient. You, in the real situation, you have to look at the cost effectiveness. You have to look at these different aspects that I mentioned here, right? And so on and so forth. But here we are doing a very simple, highly theoretical calculation, right? So don't forget that, right? Okay. So in this example, right, I wanted you to use 6 kilograms of concentrate, right? Uh, right now, I want you to do a different calculation here. So here I'm asking you to give 108 of the energy from concentrate and see if you can fill in the blanks and see if you can appreciate the difference between this versus this, and then which option would you prefer. So think about that for a minute. Right. So in addition to this, I have also given a more advanced questions in your pre-lecture questions, right? So please do attend to those before you come for the lecture discussion, right? Okay. Right. So going back to some basics that we talked about previously, remember the three volatile fatty acids: acetic, propionate, and butyric, right? And so we did talk about this. Acetic acid mainly comes from roughagers, and propionate and butyrate mainly comes from concentrates, right? Um, and so there is a recommended range ratio between forage to concentrates, right? So see what happens when you change these, right? Right? Um, so see what happens. So if you when you have high forage ratio, 80 foragers, 20% concentrate, you're going to have obviously high acetic acid production and low propionic acid production, right? So high acetic acid is going to give you a high fat percentage, right? So remember what we talked about. Propionic acid goes into the liver and becomes glucose, gluconeogenesis, goes into the udder and becomes lactose. Lactose has the property of high osmolarity, which draws in water, which helps increase the volume of milk. So we talked about the opposite for drying off, right? We cut down concentrates, so propionic acid goes down, glucose goes down, lactose goes down, osmolarity goes down, volume goes down, right? So here, as we increase the proportion of concentrates from 20 to 40 to 60 to 80, obviously propionic acid is going to go up, right? And when you do that, because the forage comes down, acetic acid is going to come down, right? So up to a certain point, so up to a certain point about here, right, close to 40 to 60 ratio, up to a certain point, milk quality goes up, right? High volume here, and then fat is also relatively decently high, right? But when the forage base falls down after a certain point, less than 40%, see, the fat percentage suddenly drops. So when fat percentage suddenly drops, the quality of the milk goes down, right? And the farmer gets a poor price for milk. As you would know, in Sri Lanka, milk is paid for by the fat percentage and SNF, right? Solids non-fat, right? So when the fat percentage goes down, the fat percentage goes down, and farmer gets a poor price, right? So that is why you need to, if you are here, then your volume is low. You have high fat but low volume, right? But you want to come to this optimum range somewhere around here, which is between 40 and 60%, right? So that is where you will have the highest volume and highest fat percentage, and therefore highest value for your milk, right, from economic standpoint. So do read this, some basic stuff, but these are the fundamental you need to understand. You can't go on giving more concentrate. So we have come across with farmers. They say, sir, I'm getting such a, my animal is giving me 40 liters, right? But the water milk is like water. The milk collector says, I adulterate, I add water to the milk. No, sir, I don't add water to the milk. However, I'm getting a very poor price. What's going wrong? I tried to give more concentrates, but it didn't fix the problem, right? So that is the fundamental problem here. So farmer doesn't know all this. So he thinks he can fix this by giving more concentrates. Do you think that is the correct option or not? That is not the correct option. So what is the correct option? What do you have to actually give here? More concentrates or more forages, right? So think about that. Okay, right? Um, so like I said, just read up, think about this, right? Okay, so these are some basic things. I'm going to speed through these, right? So these are the quality of a forage, right? From active green growth to relatively flowering and maturing into, basically straw. See how the digestibility goes down. See how the energy goes down, right? So this is important because to determine optimum time of harvest, right? So optimum time of harvest, if you harvest here, yes, digestibility is highest, energy is highest. However, the yield is lower because there's still potential for growth, right? If you harvest here, yield is maximum. However, digestibility is low, energy is low, right? So sometimes I've seen farmers say, sir, I gave enough and more to the animal. Look at the size of the room and it's huge. It's huge, it can't eat anymore, yet it's not giving me enough milk. So why is that? It's to do with this. So they give dry, mature uh, forages, poor energy, poor digestibility, and he expects a high quality product. End product, no, he won't get because that's almost a garbage feed, garbage out. Huh? Right. So read this and understand what this is. Right. So we've been talking about energy mainly, but like I said, I've been repeatedly saying there are other things to consider. Right. You need to know about those. Right. So see, milk production affected by quality. See, full bloom, full bloom, mid bloom, early bloom, pre bloom. Right. So like I said, milk highest is with pre bloom, but however, yield will be lower. So go through this. Right. Okay, so this is little important. Please pause the video and try to understand this. I will take this up at the discussion, and I will also, you will probably get an exam question also. Right, so it'll take a couple of minutes, but spend that time and try to understand what I'm trying to show here. Right, so once you go through and come up with your answer, read this and see if what you thought was correct. Right. So, common practice in Sri Lanka is a lot of farmers or veterinarians are unaware of the ME calculations. And so they go with the dry matter intake as a percentage of body weight, right? This is not entirely correct because, like I said, you know, feeding 4% of this diet versus this forage, the difference is like black and white, right? So you can say, okay, I fed 4%, right? But feeding 4% of this and this is dramatically different, right? So that is why we can't recommend to go with this alone, right? However, for a decent quality diet, that is all right, right? And you can't just go with this. You have to look at the quality of the feed as well. But if you are giving the same ration, for example, a TMR, total mixed ration, this is how it should change, right? By the fifth week, the animal has to be eating peak levels, maybe 2.5% of the body weight, dry matter intake the beginning of lactation gradually goes up to 4%, right? So just have a rough idea, and it can even go beyond 4%, right? See, right? So go through this table uh, and try to understand the differences for different body weight categories and different production levels. Right, so this is what I talked about earlier. So these are really, fundamentals, the feed pyramid, right? So remember, the the base is formed by physical fibers, forages, right? Not these, not minerals, not vitamins, not bypass fat, not bypass protein, right? So marketers try to promote these things. No point giving these things if you don't have your base right, right? So look at this. Basic ration with high quality forages. Bottom three sections, 1, 2, 3, should be able to support 75 pounds of milk per day, and that is like 35 liters of milk per day, right? Fats bypass proteins and feed additives become important only for higher producing animals, right? So remember the basics in Sri Lanka. Like I said, we are talking about 15 to 20 liter animals. Don't no need to bother with this, right? Provided that these are balanced, right? Okay, so 90% of 87% of milk is water, 12 to 13% solids. So water is really important. More water means more milk, right? So a lot of our farmers don't give sufficient water to animals. These are some really basics. I'm not going to go through those, but you need to know how much water an animal consumes. Just giving ad lib water is not the solution. You need to know the real water requirements, right? So I've given some notes on early lactation nutrition, mid lactation to late lactation, and dry period that we've all talked about. But these are really simple basics, so I'm not going to spend time on those. But please do go through these slides and educate yourselves, right? So these are some important things: particle size, right, and so on. Um, so we bring these up at the exam. I'm sorry, at the lecture discussion, and we will talk about those. Okay, guys, that is all for the feeding lectures, right? Like I said, this is by no means a comprehensive guide on feeding or nutrition of dairy cows. It's just the basic guide to get you started, right? But now, if you know these fundamentals properly, you can expand your knowledge as and when needed, depending on what you're going to specialize on, right? If you're a dairy guy, your main job is dairy veterinarian, then of course this knowledge will not be sufficient, but this will serve as a good base for you to self learn and expand your knowledge. Okay, guys, thank you very much. Have a good day.